Yeah, it should be a good show tonight, guys. And tonight's guests, none other than history buff and paranormal researcher, lecturer, podcaster, Penny Griffiths Morgan. Penny's the author of 2 books, My Haunted History, which we're going to hit on today mainly, and A Haunted Experiment. Penny also has her own podcast show called Haunted Histories. I'm sure you're all aware of that. It's a great podcast show. It's on Podbean, so check it out. Ourselves have luckily been on it, and this week's guest was Jane Harris, talking about Leominster Priory. So that'll be full of facts and history and rather professionally done as compared to our own.
So please do answer as soon as possible. Yeah,
so give it a go. Yeah. Today's show really is going to hit on some of the historical locations that are mentioned in a haunted history book. There's 10 locations in there, so I just want to pick up on some of the main ones that you're probably aware of, i.e. Drakelow Tunnels being one of them. So really, guys, should be an interesting hour. Just sit back and relax. One thing I'm going to pick up on later as well is a surprise for Craig Maloney. Craig sent us through a image. We normally do, so I was reading a snap where they feel there's a presence, and they send it along. Can we get our good friends at Alfie.art to offer their artistic interpretation of the said photograph? So keep an eye on this one. At the end, it's at the Ancient Ram Inn, and we believe it's the Bishop, and he's in there in all his glory. So have a look at that touch-up. So without further ado, we've got a lot to go through this evening. May I welcome our good friend, Penny Griffiths Morgan. Hello, Penny.
Hi.
Welcome, Penny.
Hi. Thanks for having me, boys.
Pleasure. As always.
You might regret it shortly, no doubt.
I've done enough of these. I'll just take over, dude. I'll just start talking. You won't get a word in.
That's what we're hoping for.
Definitely, we want an easy show today, Penny. So
Okay. All right. Things I've noticed C and D are in the chat room. They were teasing me when I said I let Jane talk for at least 10 minutes on the on the podcast we did, and Jane went, "Behave." It was nearer 5. Let's go. They couldn't believe that I'd let somebody else talk. So, but as I said to them, that bailed them out of a problem once when we were at Harwich, and the person they were expecting to come and introduce everything wasn't there. And I think it was C turned around and said, "Help!" And so I got shoved up there to talk for 10 minutes, right off the cuff. So my verbal diarrhea does help.
So an impromptu speak from Penny Griffiths. I bet people would have paid extra for that, Penny, definitely.
Or ask people to pay them to have to listen to it. Yeah.
Oh dear. So tell us about your books then, Penny. You're an avid author. I've read one of them. I've got the second one to read now.
So which one have you read, Russ?
I've read Haunted Histories, ready for this evening show. So
okay. Well, I mean, I've got them here, sitting here, so I can refer back. There's the first one up there, My Haunted History. That was written. I'd always wanted to write a book. Thank you very much. I'd always wanted to write a book, and I'd started doing the podcast originally with Parasearch Radio. And I got to know some really awesome authors like Richard Estep, Mike Cavell, and I'd sit and they'd be like, "Why are you not writing?" And I'm like, "Nah, I wouldn't know where to start." And it was Richard Estep who said 500 words a day, just start. And that's the mantra now. It's write 500 words a day, whether it's a blog, whether it's one of the other books I'm now writing. And once you get into a habit of it, it's like muscle memory. You do it without thinking almost. Some days it's harder than others. Some days it'll take you 2 hours to write those 500 words. Some days you've done it in 10 minutes and everything else. So, and a lot of people had been saying to me with the research I do for Haunted Histories, why don't you put that down in writing? Because you do so much work. I mean, to give you an idea how many hours worth of work I do per show, you're probably looking at about 8 to 10 hours on average per show. Because I'm one of those people, I go off down, like, it's a joke, rabbit warrens. You should you find something that makes you go somewhere else, and then you go a different direction. And before I know it, I've done 6 hours worth of reading.
Wow.
And somebody said, why don't you put that into a book? And I was thinking, oh yeah, but if I just put the history, the paranormal people won't be interested, the historians won't think it's techie enough. And then I thought, well, why don't I pick 10 locations that I've investigated myself and had experiences at, and then the history as well. And that's kind of how my haunted history came about. The photo on the front cover, which Richard Estep and Wes Coleman and a few others do love to, Gaynor Clark, love to take the rise out of me, is me squatting actually in a church doorway in Whittle in Essex. And that was, my husband took that on his mobile phone because we'd been out for the night. We'd done the Jack the Ripper tour in London, and I kept saying, I've got to get some shots. People wanting promo shots. And it was like, we knew we were going to drive back through Writtle. What I hadn't told him, and no, that's not a touched up photo. That's exactly how it came out, because the doorway itself was lit and everything else was dark. So it was pretty good. And the reason I'm squatting is the floor was wet. Otherwise I was going to sit down. And now it's become a thing that apparently I have to take photos of me squatting in doorways. I've got really itchy I've got hay fever, and my nose is like, and your nose is like, oh, it's so unprofessional. And my husband was getting quite freaked out because it's pitch black, this graveyard, and it's right set up the side of Writtle. I didn't want to tell him that there was at least one suicide committed there a few years ago, where a guy and I can't remember his name, but he'd shot someone in like Malden in Essex, and he had actually made his way to Writtle and shot himself over his mother's gravestone. And I didn't actually want to tell my husband that, because I think he would have run. Yeah, it can't be a good squat. Someone's just put in there. Yeah, no, you can't. And I am known as squatting in doorways now.
Well, that's not the only episode. You'll find out one of her stories later at one of the Victorian houses that she's used to having toilets. So
I take the mickey out of myself. There's no airs and graces here, I tell you. So that's how that book came about. And after I'd almost finished writing that one, and I started thinking, well, I want to keep writing. I'm quite enjoying this. And I came up with the idea for the next one, which I don't know if you've got, Russ.
I haven't got the Philip one now. No.
That one. Experiment. I came up with the idea for that one. I was actually, when I don't know if you saw it, I did a photo shoot for the Daily Mail with some other amazing ladies in the industry. Hazel Ford, we love Hazel. MJ Dixon, the amazing Sage. I can't even speak. MJ Dixon, your very own Jolene was there. Who else was there? Gemma. And there was a lady from the South Coast who sounds awful. I can't remember her name, because she wasn't very she didn't really talk to any of us. Anyway, and they were talking about experiments and stuff. And I was sitting there thinking, well, I know history, and I know where these experiments come from. Who thought of them? What's the history behind them? And that made me think, well, perhaps a book that looks into a few of them. Yeah. And rather than tells you how to do them, which there's loads of books on. I mean, the brilliant Sarah Chimasero, for example, does loads of work on that. Is look into where they came from and what they were about. So I picked up a few sort of experiments. Some are well known, some aren't, and then conducted them only on the spot. Not proper investigation like SPR type investigation, but just on the spot, see what would happen. And that was the second book. Which it's not as boring as it sounds.
So you're covering things like the Philip experiment, and say the human pendulum and things like that, or is it just?
We had I did the Philip experiment, which if you can see there on the cover, I can never get this right. The drawing there. It was a friend of my husband's who drew it for us. Okay. It's an airman, it's a nondescript American airman, because I was conducting the experiment at old US Air Force base that Jimmy Stewart was based at in Norfolk. The actual one that I did the presentation on for the Paracon recently, the Castle mission, it was that air base. So we did that one there. I did some trigger work at a place called the Kurzel in Southend. So I looked into trigger. I looked into the history of the Estes method, which is obviously quite a modern one. But I got an actual interview with one of its creators, Carl Pfeiffer.
The Estes is just a version of the Gansfeld, isn't it? Really, the original Gansfeld.
Sort of. Gansfeld didn't have spirit. I mean, a lot of these experiments, you can see where they came from. They're not all sort of like plucked out of
variation.
You can see this almost like the heritage of them. Yeah. It's like, and I talked about the history of EVPs and everything else, but I mean, how I don't think in 4,000 words, which each chapter was roughly, you can cover the nitty gritty of all of them. But it gives people a bit of an idea that there is a background to these things. They did come from somewhere. They weren't invented by Zach Bagans or Yvette Fielding, or there is real history to them.
Yeah, we were discussing the other day the art of mesmerisation, weren't we? Now that's going back some centuries, isn't it?
I never knew where the word mesmerise came from. And I'll tell you, I can even tell you the backstory of how I found that out. I decided, I've seen all these people bragging about how they've got diplomas in parapsychology. And so I thought, let's see how hard it is. I did one in 4 days. And I could have done it in one, but I thought, no, I better not, that's showing off. But they mentioned mesmer. And I was like, so that's where the word mesmerise came from. Wow, I never knew that. So, I was quite stunned, because I thought this would have been like a very old word, and it's not. It's only 150 years old, really. So yeah, all good.
I'll have to get that. Learning. Well, I definitely have to buy that one next. Now I've read this one, so
yes, you damn well will.
Definitely, for sure. So, just a couple of questions before we start, Penny. So you're from Essex, is that right? But you were originally from up north?
No.
No. Nearly.
Right, I'm from Essex. I was born in Essex. I grew up in Norfolk. My parents are Northerners. My mum's from Lancashire. My dad's from North Yorkshire. So I spent nearly all my school holidays and everything else up north. So that's where the northern link comes in. Yeah, so that's where the northern link. But no, I'm born and bred Essex, but my parents are Northerners. War of the Roses. It's one of the jokes I used to tell when I was at school in Norfolk. I thought, when I'd say my mum's from Lancashire, my dad's from Yorkshire, and I'll be like, it's like a war going on in my head every single day. And people in Norfolk didn't get the joke. It's only Northerners who get the Wars of the Roses joke. But Dennis has asked, where are my books available? Okay. You can order directly from me if you want to pay a little bit extra, and I send a signed copy, or they're available on Amazon on Kindle and hard copies.
Definitely. And one thing you didn't do is sign mine when I asked for it to be signed. You just posted it, unless it was in Braille or something. You didn't sign mine. No, you didn't. No.
That's unusual. I would have signed it normally. Maybe I didn't know you that well then, Russ.
No, true.
Or maybe it was in my early days when I was just like, someone wants to buy one of my books. Bring it along next time I see you, and I'll make sure I sign it. Put some facetious comment on a page to see if you find it.
All right, definitely. Underline some swear word or something. Yeah. One interesting fact about you, Penny, is that you are a 73er. So you was born in 73.
Yeah, thanks for that, mate. Telling everyone how old I am.
No, there's a lot of paranormal people born in 73.
There is quite a few of us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There is quite a few of us.
Yeah, definitely, including myself. So definitely, and so tell us about this. I remember the foreword in the book. Sorry, at the back of the book. Sorry, I forgot what end it is, but about what got you into the paranormal. It was in relation to one of the reasons was you saw your sister. Is that right?
Yeah. My late sister and I, we grew up in the middle of nowhere, basically the boonies of Norfolk. And I can't remember how old I was. I think I was about 8 or 9. So my sister would have been 5 or 6, something like that. And we were walking our dog, and there was this old barn, this old sort of falling down barn in the village. And near to it was this house that had this like brick shed in the garden that we swore we'd see the curtains move, and we used to sort of tease each other. The witch lived there, so you had to run past. Yeah, as kids do, you run past. But this barn, it was really spooky. It was really it was half falling down. It was quite high. It was probably a good 2 floors, and it would have been next to what was the old blacksmith's, when the blacksmith's cottage, when a village would have had a resident blacksmith. And my sister and I were daring each other to look through the door of this barn, and all I can say is, and please, any in the comments, do not slam me about orbs or anything else, because it was a light anomaly that did this. But the only thing I can compare it to is like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, because yes, it was a really nice day outside, but there was no light going into this building. I don't know why. I don't know why the sort of, because it's covered. It's got big trees all around it and everything else. And I was looking through the door and I could see this light darting, like flying around, and you guys know, because I was telling this story to some Americans. They said we could have been an insect, like a glowing insect. We don't really have glowing insects in this country, do we? Not like they do in other countries. And it was flying around, and my sister's looking through like a hole in the door underneath me, because she was shorter than me, she was younger than me. She was looking through it as well, and it would like fly up to a beam and then fly around it, and it wasn't what I would call following a logical path, like I would expect something floating on the air to follow. And it flew up to the door where we were standing and just hovered. This light just hovered in front of us and then darted off. And it left us both going, what? It was one of those, what? It believe it or not, it left me speechless. It was I don't know what it was. Yeah, Kay, maybe it was. But it didn't. It felt quite inquisitive, if that makes sense. It didn't. At the time, we didn't walk away thinking, "Oh, we've done something naughty." It was more like, "Huh." So it could have been an inquisitive earth elemental, because Kay's put it could have been an earth elemental not happy with us being there. It didn't feel like it didn't want us there. It felt more inquisitive. That's the only way I can describe it.
He's just said, Kay Maloney, he's just said earth elementals are very defensive of their environments. So, could be.
I don't know. Obviously, I don't know. But other things had always happened. I mean, the house we lived in was built in the 1960s. As far as we know, nobody ever died in it. But I remember my dad used to work away, and we had this glass door for the living room, and frequently we'd see a figure walk past the door. We were all in the living room, and you'd hear the creak as it went up the stairs, things like that. And you know, my next door neighbour, my mum and dad's next door neighbours have seen stuff, and it's kind of just been always there. But yeah, the light anomaly, whatever it was, I've still to this day
resonated you.
But it kind of just left us both a bit like, oh, mesmerised.
Yeah. Okay, so before we start on the book, I just want to tell you that me and John and a lot of people listening today admire a lot what you do in relation to the historical side of it. You know, so I told you before, you're a bit like the female Richard Felix. You're that type of character. You know, you're full of facts, figures. And, you know, it's so refreshing that somebody actually goes out there and seeks, you know, in relation to the two entities, get the history and then seek the validation. So I hope when we hit some of these locations, that's just exactly what happened in the book. You know, you've done your research. Do you normally do the research after or before the invest?
Normally after, if specific things have come up. But in most places I go, this is going to sound so arrogant, most places I go, I'll already have a bit of a knowledge about what would have happened there on a general sort. So if you shove me in a fort that I know was built in 1834, I'll know roughly what it was built for, why it was built, the kind of people that would have been there, just from a background knowledge. But I wouldn't necessarily know who the CO's name was or the name of the division that built it. So it's normally afterwards that I double check those kind of things. But there's always a bit of a working knowledge of a place. It's rare for me to not know anything. So, for example, if I go into a place, when I did the Leopard Inn in Stoke-on-Trent, we kept hearing coughing, and somebody was saying, "Oh, ironic considering what happened after, because that was February, and then a month later the country's locked down." But I kept, somebody was saying, "Oh, have you got a bad cough? Bad cough?" And they said, "Oh, maybe she had TB," and there was no response. And I said, "Did you have consumption?" And there was a response, because they didn't call it TB really in the 1800s. It was known as consumption. So it's that kind of knowledge I can go in with automatically. But then if she'd given us a name, I would have come away then and checked it on the census records as to if she existed, where she was from, that kind of thing.
Okay. It's just good.
Do you think, Penny, do you think it gives you a bit of a connection, knowing it before you get there?
I've thought about that, and I've been asked that before. I think I'm good enough at almost. I think possibly.
Yeah.
But as I said when I did the podcast with Jane on Monday, I can't believe Andy said that, cheeky git. He's off my Christmas card list. As I said with Jane, the one of the things that happened to her, and I'm not going to tell people if they haven't listened to it, they've got to listen to it. And I actually said that. Do you think it's because you'd looked into that a lot that made it happen to you, or do you think you looked into it because they were already communicating with you to say, we need you to open that part of your brain up? And I've been told that by sort of mediums before, that the reason I get a lot of military people come through to me is because I know so much about military history that they know they can put the images in my head and I'll know what they're trying to say. I deliberately try not to take in, if I've got any prior knowledge of a place, I try not to take that in, and I try not to speak unless it's to verify something someone said. And even then, it's normally after the event I'll verify. So if it's a place I do know a lot about, I let other people take the lead and then see where that goes. And that's how I use it, to try not to influence what I'm experiencing, shall we say.
Okay.
If that answers your question, John.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I imagine it would have quite a good effect on the situation. I think it would help a lot.
I think it does. I never understood why I'm the one that seems, and I joke about it in the book, that I'm a military magnet. I've never understood it. I'm a middle-aged, overweight mother of two. Why are these young soldiers wanting to talk to me? But somebody said it's probably because you understand, and I've never been in the military, but they said perhaps it is because they know you understand what they're trying to tell you, because you can put the pieces together and explain it and be a conduit, I suppose. So maybe that is it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice answer. I'm just going to link to the first location now. So just reading your book as well, and something that struck home to me was how peed off you get about our heritage and history being destroyed. Things like asylums and workhouses just being taken away from us. Not necessarily just for the kind of investigation, but just for the pure heritage and history of the UK. And just want to share that and put that out there as well. I think there's no way we can, put a complaint in or anything. Is there always to stop it happening? Nothing. I just don't want to know.
I find it absolutely, it's disgusting, if you ask me, that, and I'm not going to talk, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk workhouses non-stop, but things like the workhouse movement and even the asylum movement of the Victorian era, they were pivotal movements, whether you like them or not. And I don't think they're as bad as people think they were. I really don't, based on all the research I've done, and I know that upsets a lot of people when I say that, but you put it in context. There would have been over 600 workhouses in the UK in the late 1800s. In England, we only have 3 museums to workhouses.
Yeah.
Now, there's still an awful lot of workhouse buildings. A lot of them became hospitals, for example, because the workhouse was the early infirmary for the poor who had no money. But those hospitals, now they're not fit for purpose. They're being pulled down. and I think it's really not even from a paranormal point of view wanting to investigate these places, but I just think it's kind of like, I wrote a blog about it once years ago. I said, who decides what history stays? It's almost like, because of the fact it's one of the more unpalatable periods of history as people think, they want to get rid of it. Whereas to me, it's pivotal. It's kind of early welfare state. And it's like with the asylums, and people criticize the asylums. We still don't know how to deal with mental health properly. So why do we think that 200 years ago they would have done any better? It just annoys me that, castles, yes, lovely. Stately homes, yes, lovely. Workhouse, oh no. If I tell someone I'm going to go and visit Southall Workhouse near Nottingham, which is an amazing place, which you should all go and visit given the chance. It's fascinating. They're like, well, why would you want to go there? Poor people were kept prisoner there. Oh, it's, yeah. So, yes, I do get annoyed. I mean, I was looking at some old photos of what Chelmsford used to look like before the 70s, and it was so pretty. Yet the buildings were pulled down, these great big concrete structures were put up that are just ugly. Just ugly.
Okay, so workhouse then. That's location number 1 we're going to cover.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Gresham Hall Workhouse. So
Gresham Hall, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. Where is it and when was it built?
Okay, well, Gresham Hall Workhouse is in Norfolk. It's near a place called Dereham, or Dereham, as they would pronounce it. It's about 15 miles outside of Norwich. It is a museum. It is definitely well worth going to. I mean, I've got to plug these places because they're losing money with the lockdown as well. So they need people to come and visit them when they're back allowed to. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. You can spend the whole day there. It's actually got a farm attached to it, which was there when it was a workhouse. It was one of the ones that started off before the Poor Laws of 1834. And it started off as what they call House of Industry, which was kind of the where kind of poor people went before the Poor Law started. And what's going on with the photos?
One of the guys has said, "Can you make the picture of us three bigger?" That's what it's not.
You don't want that of me, Ben. You'll see like my spots and open eyes. Distance. I put Vaseline on my lens just
my
to
head's
make
big enough. I don't want to ruin the view. Sorry, Ben. Sorry.
But yeah, so it was built in the late 1700s as a house of industry, and when the Poor Law Amendment Act came in 1834, basically, this isn't a workhouse lesson, because if anyone's interested in the workhouse, I have got a presentation over on Haunted Histories on workhouse history that's not as dull as it sounds, I promise. Basically, before 1834, each parish was responsible for looking after their poor. So if you had a parish that had a lot of poor people, they were skint, basically, and that's a technical term. But and the cotton mills, yes, Ben, that is another one of the buildings I mentioned that I find it devastating how we're ripping that part of our history out. That yes, they were horrendous, but they were commensurate with the time. So yes, good shout on that one, Ben. I like you. What was I going to say? Yes, so it was the parishes, and they were like, well, firstly, too many people are claiming, no, Penny shouldn't be in the main picture, Mark. No. No. They were claiming too much. It was too easy to claim out relief, as it was called. So you said some parishes were absolutely skint, and so they were like, how do we deal with this? And it was actually Southall in Nottingham. No, I haven't, Gary. I'll look it up. It was actually Southall in Nottingham that came up with the idea of pooling a load of parishes' resources and building one big house, and sort of trying to stop offering what they called out relief, because they thought offering cash to people was going to encourage them not to find work. So they started changing it and offered sort of coal to people who were poor, bread to people who were poor, and it was a bit like with people saying they were going to offer vouchers to people on welfare now. They were like, oh, I need the money, I need to make my own choices. And that's where kind of the workhouse came up. But because Mitford and Launditch Union, as it was known, which is Gresham Hall, was big enough, they converted it to a full-blown workhouse. So off the top of my head, when did that one? I think it's about 1836, 1837 off the top of my head. I can't remember the actual date because they all had slightly different dates that they all opened. Yeah. But it was the 1830s after the Poor Law Act, but it had already been a house of industry before that for the local parish.
Yeah.
So you go, potted history.
I looked at some of the photographs on Google Images, and it's a mighty impressive building. It's just one of those standoutish buildings. Definitely, is it quite large in there to investigate? Or?
It's huge. Yeah. It's absolutely huge. I mean, it is a standard layout for a workhouse. A lot of them had that standard sort of. You had the entrance hall where you would go in. You had a separate entrance for the governors who ran the board, and all that. And then you had the separate areas outside, because people were segregated. So it is quite a standard setup, and it's one of those kind of setups that if I'm driving around, I can normally spot the old workhouse, and all I have to do is look it up. Yep, that was a workhouse. So yes, it's impressive, and I mean you only access probably a half of it because the Norfolk County Council use a lot of it as storage for documents and things. So, but it's massive. I think the most I've been there with is about 40 people, and I reckon you could easily get in an extra 10 because it's not cheap to hire because it's so big, and obviously it's a museum. It's got a lot of antiquities in it, but it's a day out. If you're in Norfolk and you want something to do for the day, it's a day out, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. So obviously you've been on investigation there once or twice or more?
Twice so far. Well, I've been there on a couple of day trips just during the day where I have had experiences, and I've been there twice now to investigate it, and I should be going back there again next year at some point, hopefully.
Be interesting to see if you pick up on a few of the same things. So one of the incidents you had there was an issue on the old pauper stairwell there with the pauper went.
That was during the day. My mum isn't a big believer. She's very sort of don't talk about things like that, and I think it's the Catholic in her. And one of the stories we would get told by the guide is there's this cupboard, and supposedly a woman died in there giving birth to an illegitimate baby. And I was thinking, I've heard all these types of things before. My mum was like, go on then. You think you're sensitive. What can you pick up from this cupboard? And I was like, nothing. I'm not picking anything up. And for some reason, there's these wooden stone stairs, and you can see where they've been carved away by people's feet. It's quite when you think someone's been trudging up and down those for 200 years. And I just put my hand on the step, and my mum said I went really pale and kind of my eyes glazed over, and I just got a sense of a woman falling and women standing at the top of the step. And I told her this, and she said, well, you certainly looked weird. And I said, well, that's what I saw. So she went and found one of the guys, and she said, what was up there? Because it's all roped off. You're not allowed up there. And they went, oh, those were the women's dorms. And Mum said, well, do you know if a woman ever died down the step? Oh, no, we wouldn't have those records because a lot of the records pre-1914 were destroyed in a fire. So, but it was the fact that, I pictured women. It wasn't, this girl didn't fall. She was pushed because it wasn't. And she, I think she died. That was the impression I was getting. But when I spoke to somebody else who's been there, they said they had exactly the same vision, that exact same staircase. So, yeah.
So hence why you need to go back and try it again.
Yeah. I didn't pick anything up on that staircase last time I was there, but I didn't really get a chance to really sort of focus because I didn't, when I picked that up, I wasn't really thinking of anything. It just came. But to find somebody else who said they'd had exactly the same kind of vision, it was a bit, okay, this is, and it's still, my mum's still a bit, she can't understand that one. She doesn't know. She said, oh, you must have known that was the women. I said, no, I didn't. I had a 2-year-old at that point. I didn't have time to look at that kind of thing.
Okay, so in the schoolroom, you encountered a child spirit in there, and it was acting with the REM pod on command. Is
Oh, the school room. So he said the skull room. Then this is the accent thing. I said was going to happen. School. Yes. There was I think the kids. That was on the first time I went there. I think the kids. They were quite intrigued by the REM, and making it light up pretty colours, and we were getting them to have their own little disco. I don't know if it was one child or more than one child, but yes, they were quite intrigued by the rem and were setting it off on command. And not just 10 minutes afterwards, literally go on, run past this, get it go off again, bang, it would go off again. And they were having their own little disco show. It was a really, really fun atmosphere in the room. That's the only way I can describe it.
It normally does when it's a fun atmosphere, doesn't it? To kick off a bit more, because I feel more confident around you. Your aura's it's attuned with them. So
yeah, definitely.
Talking of some joviality as well, and your toilet issue. Can you tell us about what occurred to you in the toilet area of the building?
Okay. Yeah, all right. I'd gone to the loo, as you do. You drink a lot of coffee on these things. You need the loo quite frequently, unless you've got a super bladder. And I was sitting on the loo, and they're quite old-fashioned toilets, and they had the huge cisterns high up on the wall. Now, I'm only 5'2", and I had to stand on my tiptoes to pull the chain. At one point I thought, I'm not going to reach this blasted thing. So that's how high up it was. And I was sitting on the loo, and I felt almost like someone do that to my face, just sort of touch my face. Next thing I know is I look up, and the toilet chain is swinging round, like someone's just set it off. And I'm sitting there sort of thinking, okay. I said, can you stop that, please? And it just stopped dead.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, thanks for that. Someone's in here with me. And I went back, and again, I was talking to the curator, and I this was on an investigation, and I said, can you tell me what those where the toilets are? What was that? And they said, oh, that would have been the quarters because in I think it was 1853, the rules changed, and married couples over, say, the age of 60 who could no longer have babies were allowed to elect to share a room together to keep them together. And that would have been what those quarters were turned into. So basically, someone took umbrage at me dropping my trousers and having a wee in their living room.
Nick's department said, gosh.
Is that the best you can come up with, Nick?
Yeah, that's Nick. I know you've got more words in your vocab than that, mate.
I'm sure you
Oh, bless him. So, definitely. So that's Gresenhall Workhouse in Norfolk. So,
go and visit it. Go and visit it. Yes, definitely. It's part of. I think it's part of the Norfolk Museums. So you've got Norwich Castle. You've got Strangers Hall, which is another one I wrote about in the book. Loads of places around there that you can go and visit. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's one of 3 full-on workhouse museums in the UK.
Okay, great. Moving on to a local favourite of ours, it's in the book as well. So especially around here, Penny, we need to cover that. Especially, not very often we get a historian about places. So
even if I got the county wrong in the book,
if you got the county wrong in the book, Warwickshire, not Warwickshire. Everybody, we're talking about Drayclove tunnels. So
love there, yeah.
We all do. I think everybody on the who's watching tonight loves the place, and have all been. So tell us a bit about that historically, Penny. So we know a little bit ourselves, but.
Well, during World War II, a lot of aircraft production and engine production and everything else was in your neck of the woods, so Coventry and all around there. And Coventry was quite badly bombed, and they realised that all the factories were close to each other. And so, am I allowed to swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay. There's certain words I won't use. But basically, they realised if they took another bombing like that, where all the factories were, production was buggered.
Yeah.
Basically. So they came up with the concept of shadow factories that could start production if the main ones were bombed, because as much as we were doing to the Germans and bombing their centres of industry, which we were, they were doing the same to us. It was quid pro quo. And so they started building this one at Drayclove. And yeah, it kind of didn't go too well. And by the time it was finished, World War II was nearly over. So it then potted history. Then I think it ended up working on tanks, if I remember rightly, off the top of my head. And then they decided to convert it into something similar to Kelvin and Hatch, the secret nuclear bunker, and they extended it and changed a few bits and turned it into a bunker, a nuclear bunker. Kind of the potted history of Drakelow, without going into how many people died there and everything else, which most people are quite well aware of.
Definitely. And you obviously read about Harry Dapper being the first and unfortunate soul in Tunnel 1 with his two colleagues unnamed. So they were excavating away and extending it. I think it was the rover then, wasn't it, for the rover? And unfortunately it all caved in on them. And Harry often gets seen, or something often gets seen in Tunnel 1, because you saw it yourself, haven't you? You saw something.
I definitely had an experience. I didn't know that it was Tunnel 1 I was in. It was the first time I met Craig and Kay, the Maloneys. I think hopefully they're still watching. I actually met them on this investigation. It was the second time I went to Drakelow, and unusually the group I was with was all blokes, which is quite unusual, because normally you find it's more women on these. And when I got put with all these blokes, I thought, oh God, they're just going to be here for a lark. They're not going to take it seriously. And I was proved wrong. They were a cracking bunch of guys. And one of them, him and I, were having experiences left, right, in the centre, which probably sounds a bit wrong for a married woman to say that, but paranormal experiences. He I think he'd grown. Was it he who'd grown up in some part of Essex, which I was like, why would you want to be there, sort of thing. And then he was anyway, we kept seeing something moving around in this tunnel, and we were getting ready to leave, and three of us started to feel like the ceiling was coming down on us, and we were finding it really hard to breathe. Like all three of us started going sort of like we were being crushed. Didn't think anything of it at the time. It was only afterwards, when I was looking up my notes, I was like, which tunnel were we in? And when I checked on the map, Tunnel 1. And there was three of us affected.
That's the tunnel that gets played with the 1940s music on the tannoy.
Which I've also had. I had that come through on a spirit box on my first visit, I think it was, with Trident Paranormal. We had 40s music coming through on a spirit box.
Harry Dapper's accident actually occurred on, I think it was Halloween 1941. That's when it occurred. So, and the poor soul was buried as well on. I believe it was bonfire night. So he had two days.
It's horrific. I mean, it was scary actually feeling like that. Okay. So to have it was weird. The three of us all suddenly, you can almost. It wasn't like one of us did it and then the other two. The fact it was only three of the group felt it. The fact that all three of us started going at the same time. And like, I feel really claustrophobic, so I feel like I'm being enclosed, and the ceiling's coming down on us, and it was a weird to be. I rarely feel things like that. I feel emotions. I normally and if there's a spirit who's been crying a lot, I will start crying. But that was the first time I felt something that heavily, and it was. They say Drakelow never disappoints.
I'll tell you one thing that you need to fill me in on that I didn't know about is a spirit called the Reverend.
Oh, the Reverend.
I've heard of that one before.
Yeah.
So, where he likes to use the C word quite a lot, apparently.
He does. Yes. See you next Tuesday. Yes. Yeah. I don't know anything about him. I have not been able to. Supposedly, when it was derelict, he used to take girls down there to assault them. I don't know. I have looked in the newspapers for any accounts of girls being assaulted in that area. I can't find any. Whether he is a manifestation of a load of different things, and that's the image he's putting into mediums' heads, I don't know. I don't know. He is a bully. Whatever this is, and he likes to be known as the Reverend. He's not religious, from what I can make out, from what he told me, but he wouldn't communicate with us if there was blokes on the board. He would only communicate when me and this other woman were on the Ouija board. And I didn't he was taking her over. He was affecting her really, really badly. I mean, she was going pale. She was shaking. She looked ill. She suddenly looked really drained. And I kept saying to it, "You're right, you're right." She goes, "I feel weird. I feel weird." And I basically told him to F off and leave her alone. And all I could hear in my head was the C word being screamed at me, literally screamed at me in my head, because I wasn't letting him affect me. I was pushing him away, like spiritually pushing him away.
Mm.
And I said there was a medium there who's investigated there like 40, 50 plus times. And I said, "Is that his favourite word?" And he went, "Yeah, it frequently comes up if someone's not falling for it." So yeah, he I don't know who it is. I say I can't find any historical confirmation of this man. And maybe it is a manifestation of things that have been brought in there, because there is a belief that people have done black magic, satanic rituals and all that, because all that kind of stuff supposedly they've been found. I don't know. But all I know is all I could hear was a male voice screaming the C word in my head, and that's not a word I tend to use. So why it would come through, and we did have to take the woman away from out of that area. She looked like she was going to pass out. She did not look good.
If any of you on chat have come across this spirit before or picked up on a name called the Reverend or similar, then leave a note, because that's something that we'd definitely like to do when we go back, is try and hunt that one down. So
We've not met that one yet.
No, not that one yet. So Penny, on to the next one. Next time's moving on. It's Highlands House in
yes,
the old building.
Yes, I like this one because it's only 2 miles up the road for me. And as you well know, when you do a nighttime investigation and you finish at 3 a.m. and then you realise you've got a 3-hour drive home, it's quite nice to know if you've got a 15-minute one and it's past McDonald's on the way, an all-nighter. Yes, Highlands House. It's where V Festival used to take place. The house itself is about 300 or so years old. Very Georgian looking, like 1700s Georgian looking. Sorry?
Grade 2 listed. I looked at that.
Yes, it is listed. Yep. Yes. So what was I saying? Yes. So it's had a few different owners, but its main, I would say, claim to fame is that during World War II, it was the headquarters of what became known as the SAS, known then as L Detachment. And most people think this is fallacy. They think it's myth. It's not. It really was the HQ for what became the SAS.
Wow.
Actually, they were disbanded after the war and then were reformed, but that's by the by. The SAS were based there during World War II.
There you go, John. One of your subjects.
Oh, was it the SAS? The history of the SAS?
John likes the SAS.
It's one of the ones I'm researching a bit at the moment because it's fascinating. And the sort of David Sterling and then Paddy Mayne and all those people and how they were treated, how Paddy Mayne was treated, especially the fact he should have got a VC and he didn't. Yes, fascinating. It's fascinating. But yes, it was the HQ for the SAS.
Yeah. And another thing, it was Lord Kitchener visited there. Lord Kitchener.
He did during World War I because it was a VAD voluntary assisted detachment. I think it stands for VAD hospital. So a voluntary hospital basically during World War One. And the chap who owned the building at the time, whose name I've just completely forgotten, actually built by hand all the bedside cabinets for the wounded who were there. And at one, they reckon over something, it's about 1,500 men were looked after there because the Red Cross, I think it was, took over the grounds and built loads of marquees. But yeah, Kitchener came there, and it's supposed to have, a soldier's meant to have said to him, "When do you think this war will end?" And he says, "I don't know, do you?" But then obviously Kitchener died 2 years before the war ended anyway.
Okay, so tell us about your most freakiest experience there. Treat me out.
It freaks other people out, but it doesn't. Do you want the shadow figure or?
Well, I like the shadow figure, but the obvious one's pretty creepy. So.
Okay, I'll tell both. Well, there's a room there that's very grand. It's where a lot of people have their weddings. Personally, I wouldn't even have a funeral in it. I don't like the room. I didn't like it the minute I walked in. It's all gold leaf. It's very elaborate and everything. I felt very, very uncomfortable in there. As we were sitting there listening to the medium talk, I saw a shadow of a man on the wall, I see a little shadow. I saw a shadow of a man on the wall, and it wasn't the medium. It wasn't anyone else in the room because I was checking where the light was going. And as I say in the book, sometimes it pays not to pay attention to the person talking. As I saw this shadow moving counterintuitively to the way the medium was. That's the only way I can describe it. It was a shadow of a man at the top of the wall moving in the wrong way to how the medium was walking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when I went back in that room with just a couple of people, the words that were being spat out were like out, men only, out. And the historian of Highlands House thinks it was probably a chap by the name of John Atwood, who was renowned for not thinking very highly of women. And that was his room, apparently. So I would never ever get married in there. In fact, when I was taking some photos there, not so long went for the book, there was couples looking round to get married in there, and I just wanted to say to them, pick another room. This one ain't nice, but I didn't because But no, my favorite story from Highlands, which freaks people out when I tell them this, is we're in an area known as the library. And it's got this massive table in there. And somebody was running the Portal app on a phone. Now, I know what people think of apps and stuff, but you just nobody knows. Nobody really knows if things work or not. And through the voice, and there was a lot of people in there who heard it, it kept saying, Corporal. No, Wes, he wasn't wearing a uniform. Corporal, Penny, Corporal. And those were the two words it kept coming out with. And I wasn't the only one who heard it. Everyone heard it. And I said, okay, do you want me to come back with one or two people and you can talk to me later? Yes. And then it stopped talking. And so later on in the evening, I went back there with one person who's also a military historian. She's actually a history teacher in Essex called Sophie. And we had a novelist with us. And I was like, come on, I'm back. I said I'd come back, etc., etc. And the words Corporal, Terry, not came up on the ovulus. And I was like, okay, that's pretty specific. And then I said, did you die in World War II? Yes, Europe. So I wrote all this down. Thinking about it now, I should have taken a photo of it because it wasn't my ovulus, but you learn by your mistakes, don't you? And a couple of days later, I thought, let's have a look, see if there was a Corporal Terry not. I've got to refer to the book to give you the actual details on this one because I haven't memorized them, if you pardon me, just looking for the chapter. So I thought I'd look up and see if there was a Corporal Terry Knott, spelled Knott. I was not expecting to see Corporal John Terence Knott, service number PLY-X2791, who was a Royal Marine Commando who died in North Germany on the 7th of April 1945 due to injuries sustained in a battle near the River Weser in Stolzenau, who's buried in a Northern Europe cemetery. Now, what was even more interesting about Corporal Knott was I can't find any service records anywhere, like which units he was attached to, other than that he was a Marine Commando. Now, anyone who knows about SAS history, John, you'll probably be able to confirm this for me. A lot of the people who were in the SAS, especially L Detachment, which it was called in the war, were from which part of the army or the military? Marine Commandos.
Marine Commandos.
And well, they all were. They were 7, 9, and 11 company Marine Commandos. And also, you will never see on their records that they were SAS because it's a detachment. It's not a new regiment for them, if that makes sense. And when I looked up that battle, it was a battle that the SAS was in, that he died in.
That's just brilliant, isn't it?
and that's the story that freaks people out, because to find someone's name and to find the facts, as far as I can tell, 99% fit. I think Terry wanted to talk.
That's just amazing when you get, especially when you're on site and you get the validation. That's just tremendous. Yeah. So I forgot about it. I genuinely had forgotten about it. And a couple of days later, I thought, let's have a look, see if we can find him. And when that name came up, I actually did. I had a shiver go up my spine. It's kind of.
I think so too. Amazing.
like I said, can't prove it. I can't prove it unequivocally that it is him. But the fact that I know that they formed from 7, 9, and 11 Marine Commandos, and the battle he was in was an SAS battle.
Wow. Brilliant. So you had quite a lot happen there, you know, obviously we're running out of time there, but you had a scrying incident, didn't you, in there? You was you saw in the bridal suite, you saw a woman while you were doing scrying.
Yep.
Do you like your divination techniques? So you would do.
I tend to. It sounds awful. I like playing with a lot of these different techniques because you never know what's going to suit you. It's a bit like with divining. I'm better with rods than I am with a crystal. Mirror work, I do tend to get some quite good results from, but sometimes I find it hard to sort of zone out to get the results, especially when I'm a people watcher. I like watching what other people are doing. So that one was a bit strange though, that experience. But if you want to find out more about it, you have to buy the book.
Buy the book, yeah. So that's an hour, Penny. So I need to move on because I want to show a bit of evidence that some of the guys are looking for. So can you just quickly tell us where we can buy your books and how we can listen to your podcasts?
You can head on over to Haunted Histories on Facebook. And I always list the podcasts on there. You can go onto my website, hauntedhistories.co.uk. They're all listed on there. They're all via Paranormal UK Radio, which I think there's Podbean, Apple, all the different channels. But yeah, the easiest thing is just follow me on Facebook, Haunted History, and you'll find them all on there. The books are available on Amazon, or like I say, if you want a signed copy, you can let me know and I can let you know how much the postage is going to be depending on where it's being posted to. And there's also the website, also blogs that I write every week on a variety of different subjects, and I've also got videos on there, like sort of short bite-sized history things on various subjects, and there'll be a new one hopefully going up in the next week on Victorian schools, so like ragged schools,
it's in the
British
book as
schools,
well,
and national schools. Yeah.
Okay, so get out, buy the books, guys. Really good read, and definitely follow the podcast. She's just got one out with Jane, haven't you?
On Leominster Priory. All I'll say is there's an awful lot of Jane and I have a lot of banter when we talk, but we also look into things quite in depth. And Jane's history knowledge is kind of the earlier part, mine being post 1800. So between us, we can cover pretty much anything.
All right, Penny, I'll have to leave it there, so move on because the hour's gone. But we really, really appreciate you coming on, mate. It's been
thank you.
It's been really insightful. I hope you people watching have try and get a clasp a bit more history, you know, before you go on location, and hope we get you into it because the more people into it, the better, really.
Definitely, and do visit those museums. They're not as dull as you remember them from as kids.
All right then, mate. So speak to you soon, Penny.
Take care.
Take care, mate. Bye.
Take care.